So how does the school talk about it? And I'm really providing you with these words so that when you go in, of course, mental health recovery is so important. But for educators, what they're interested in is reestablishing a sense of emotional safety and restoring the learning environment. How do you go back to calm routine? And if mental health services are a part of that, then that's where mental health professionals play a role. It is really about emotional regulation and reestablishing emotional regulation and really reestablishing attachment, because during a crisis, both of those things are lost by students and by staff who are trying just to cope with this overwhelming experience. I want to point out that sometimes people think, schools are very simple, but like families, they are very complex human systems. And it really depends on whether or not prior to your entry, is this a closed system or an open system. And schools themselves refer to themselves as the school family. How did it deal with human problems and conflicts prior to your entry? How is it affected by traumatic events? And the way you can determine that is through the message of the leadership and the way they deal with children who are having problems. Is there a system of referral? Or is the administrator one of those people who still exist in schools who says, you know what, this is not my problem. It's not that it is important, but I'm here to teach children, and I wasn't trained in this, so they'll just have to be referred out. I can't deal with it, if I don't hear about it, I don't have to deal with it. And it's a sad commentary, but there are still educators who feel very much in that way. Some schools see themselves as an oasis of calm, often in a community of chaos. And here is a little map that part of our research that Dr. Langley and I did over the past many years is we've been interested in exposure to violence and to what extent have students been exposed to violence. We are been very interested in PTSD and traumatic stress. And as we all know, exposure to violence is the first criterion for PTSD. So here is a map for those of you who have been in Los Angeles. This is the Far West Valley, the San Fernando Valley. And to explain this a little bit more, the black dots are represent incidents where there have been unsolved homicides. Not all the homicides in that area, but unsolved homicides. And the little monopoly houses that are numbered are elementary schools. So that the children, and this map was taken from our LAUSD map, and the LA Times put this in an article in the newspaper, gathering data over 7 years from the LAPD, the LA Police Department, of unsolved homicides. So as you looked at this, you can see that as children walk to school, they would have passed these areas where unsolved homicides occurred. Now, this is an area of the city schools in which there are higher scores, better grades, better attendance, and fewer expulsions and suspensions. Now, next I'm going to show you the area of South Los Angeles, once known as South Central, and it's a similar map, the same size area, but they represent an area where they're their lowest grades, highest rates of expulsions and suspensions, and high absenteeism. And you can imagine in your mind, think about what this map would look like to you, how many black dots among the same number of schools. Here is the map. You can see that children walking to schools have a completely different mindset, and their preparation and their readiness to learn once they get into the classroom is going to be completely different than the children in the previous map. In fact, when this map came out, within the same week, there was one school that had 4 lockdowns because of daytime gang shootings that were going on, and bullets were going through the playground. So, symptoms of PTSD, we all know about that, and I'm just going to go past this slide. And in our research, we found that as we looked at our school district, which has had over, at that time, 750,000 students, K-12, had over 1,000 schools, that most definitely those most at risk for violence exposure were ethnic minorities, those in areas who lived in lower socioeconomic status, older children, that is middle school and older, those who had already shown some early conduct problems, which may have been psychogenic, and also living in urban areas as compared to suburban areas, as well as higher percentages of males. At a national level, C. Everett Koop, who was at that time the Surgeon General, stated that interpersonal violence was one of the most significant public health issues facing America, and it was right in the midst of that point in time where school shootings were on the upsurge. So we know that violence affects students in the classroom, and for all those symptoms that we talk about, children are not able to concentrate. They experience preoccupation with traumatic thoughts. They avoid schools, and they develop many other behavioral and emotional problems. And this was reinforced by a study that was done in New York City after 9/11. There are previous studies who document also that violence exposure has these very serious impact on reading ability, grade point average, school absenteeism, lower high school graduation, and increased expulsion and suspension. And just to ask a quick question, Andrew, will the participants get a copy of these slides to look at after this presentation?
I think it will remain on the web for them.
It will, great. So, because I want to give Dr. Langley time, and I'm going to go through these because some of them are self-explanatory. And one of the things we know is that parents aren't always available to children because of their own responses to a trauma, and also particularly school trauma. Their issues may not be the same as the children who are more fearful and anxious and resistant to returning to schools. Also, as I mentioned, educators can be psychologically minded or they cannot. And these are specific things that I've heard people say to me, and it doesn't matter what their level of training might be, that sometimes being psychologically minded, it has to do with the individual rather than the title of the person. And we also know that PTSD in children is a hidden disorder, that the adults might not be able to recognize distress because they interpret the symptoms in different ways. This is a child who's, not listening, who's a troublemaker, who's aggressive. There are all sorts of labels, but it may be, in fact, a child who is traumatized. I also want to say that sometimes the challenges, and I put this in because this slide was developed by someone who's a very bright person in an academic, and I just want to mention that when we explain things to educators, we can't use language from the university. It just doesn't translate, and we've got to really think about what this means to teachers who may not, in fact, be able to understand what it is that we're saying because we're using our own jargon. So also you need to be aware that some states change the teachers into disaster workers automatically by legislation. If this is true, mental health professionals can play a great role in providing training to the teachers. That their focus, however, is really on academic achievement and how mental health professionals can contribute to that. Also, can you help students attend more regularly? Can you support special education students in getting to graduation, which very few special education students actually achieve? And can you reduce the rates of suspension, expulsion, high-risk behaviors, and suicidal thoughts and behaviors? And we have one colleague in New Orleans who actually goes to schools. He is an expert in trauma. He says, give me the ones that are expelled or suspended. Give me those kids, and let's see what we can do. And he's been very, very successful in that. I love this because this was given to me by the Teachers Union, you've got to convince the teachers that somehow your involvement is going to reduce their workload because they feel they're already doing everything for children. And this, I love this because I think it's really a good graphic example of how they feel. Here's something that's been wildly successful with teachers, and I just wanted to show you how it's simple, but it's also something that they related to, is that the behavior in the classroom is just the tiniest part of what is above it, because behavior is an iceberg, is above the waterline. And there are so many things that we need to look at below that explain what might be happening and might contribute to a teacher's understanding and what might need to be done to support or to provide help to any particular student. Psychological first aid, I just want to mention it. It's part of the U.S. Department of Ed, and it's on their website. It's a particular model that Robin Gurwitch, Chip Schreiber, and I developed called Psychological First Aid, Listen, Protect, Connect. And it is different from the SAMHSA model in that it was specifically organized for non-mental health professionals, for teachers who say, I don't know what to say and I was never trained to do this. And we can train teachers to provide psychological first aid in 45 minutes. But I think that has to be left for another time. So here's what I think that we can all do as mental health professionals is really psychoeducation about normative and common responses to trauma, and really developing a roadmap that helps educators know what to expect, not to predict what might happen, but what to expect. And I'm going to end with this one diagram that was put together, it was a student helped me put together, and I really love it. So I said, what does baseline functioning mean? Like, what does every day look like at school? And what we know is that normal is not the same every day, that we can have our ups and our downs, and it depends what's going on when the event happens. And as we know, teachers, when I explain this to teachers, when a crisis event happens, it plunges teachers and students and administrators into a vulnerable state during which usual coping mechanisms fail. In fact, everyone's asking, well, what should we do? What should we do next? And particularly for students, they may feel helpless and hopeless because they don't really have life experience to help them understand what next steps to take in order to protect themselves. So it is with the help of important adults and caring adults who can provide psychological first aid that functioning begins to improve. And there is a group of students who never do really get back to a new normal. And for these students, we suspect that it's because of a trauma history. And I'm going to say that this is really observation. I've never done research in this particular area, but I can tell you that LA Unified School District had 2,500 to 3,000 crisis incidents every year. And we have over 250 members on our crisis teams. And just an estimate, just by talking, training over the past 30 years, that there are a group of students who do worse, and we believe it's because they have a trauma history. So please take that with a grain of salt. The majority of students actually do quite well, and they reach a new normal, and it just really depends on your school and your community, what the percentages are. And we also know that in the new area of research, there is such a thing as post-traumatic growth. And the more that we learn about this, the more perhaps we can begin to target our interventions to address how we can move students to post-traumatic growth. I want to end right here because and turn this over to Dr. Langley, and I thank you so much for your time and attention.